Hi, so welcome everyone. I'm Alex Arnold from the Taos Institute. I'm the executive consultant here. And this is one of our Taos Conversations, a free event. As you could tell, it's hosted in the Taos Institute Commons online community. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the Taos Institute, we are a nonprofit, a virtual organization, and we promote social constructionist, relational, and appreciative ideas and practices. We do that with this online community, free events, we have dialogue with the authors, we have community meet and greets. We also have a lot of our resources on our website. We publish free downloadable books. We have a collection of over 90 books. I encourage you to check them out. And really on a variety of topics. So a lot of diverse resources on our website. We also have courses and workshops that you can find in the Commons or on our website. And so I'm very, very pleased today to be here with John Stewart to talk about his Beyond Empathy project. So thank you so much for being here, John, and for hosting this conversation.
Sure. Thank you, Alex, for your help. Since we're a small group, it may very well be that we'll be able to each introduce ourselves as we get into conversation. What I plan to do today for the first part of our time together is frame our conversation by talking about this project. And I've got a short, about 8 or 9 slide presentation that will help me clarify this. And so if it's all right with you, I'm going to shift to that now. That I'm going to share a screen and begin here. I'm calling this A Beyond the Empathy Project, and each of these terms has got some significance for me. The indefinite article that begins it, rather than saying the Beyond Empathy Project, which is what I had originally called it, is meant to say that in the spirit of social construction, that a variety of people could have projects dealing with empathy and with the notion of looking at elements of relationships that are in some way beyond empathy, that they could have this kind of project, a project that has those characteristics that's different from this one. The word beyond suggests that whereas in some conceptualizations of empathy, it's viewed as the ultimate connection capability of human beings, I'm suggesting that there isn't value in looking beyond that and to perhaps seeing empathy as the penultimate rather than the ultimate accomplishment. Empathy means what I think it probably means to all the people who are here, and we saw that in the definition, and we'll show some features of this and talk about some elements of this construct, some weaknesses and strengths of it. And then by project, I mean to just name a variety of practical and academic and applied studies, courses, webinars, podcasts, writings, articles, books, because I want the application of what we're talking about to be understood as really broad as the interests that you bring to this topic. And so we've also already, in just the informal conversations today, identified pedagogical and health sciences applications, and those are certainly 2 areas that that empathy has been an important construct in the past. And so this project I've found can take several tracks depending on what approach we want to take. And so today I'm beginning with this construct, empathy, partly because it's a central construct for people in a wide variety of fields, not only where you'd expect in clinical psychology and counseling and so on, but also, as I mentioned, physicians and nurses, other health sciences professionals, in literary scholars who talk about character development and verisimilitude, as a feature of effective narrative and playwrights, screenwriters, actors who find it necessary to empathize with characters in order to recreate their version of those in performance situations. Wide variety of people, of course, close relationship scholars and communication scholars also. And there are a couple of problematic elements, which I will talk about in a bit, are addressed by this project. And so this is a suitable way to approach this project. One could also begin with the construct social stereotyping, because of what it means. Again, I'm not thinking of any special meaning for it. And the key threat of stereotyping, which is grouping, is addressed in this project. One could also begin with a more general construct of ways of thinking, and you could think of relationship as building similarity, or also as building difference. And that phrase, "you're the one," is going to come back up as we progress here. So a wide variety of possible approaches to this project. This is what I've been able to do so far. The first of the two articles in the Atlantic Journal of Communication was co-authored by Jody Koenig-Kellis, whose colleague is one of the Kathys here, right? Abby Van Meter was host of this podcast that I appeared on. And at this point, I'm looking for collaborators, and that doesn't mean people who have to agree to work with me or do anything that I'm thinking ought to be done, but rather people who are just interested in the enterprise and have an approach of their own to take toward it and some ideas about it. And I'm hoping that you'll keep an eye out for my email and let me know after we're finished if you're one of those people. The overall goal of this is to humanize conversations. And historically, I have an interest in DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I've done some work in that area. And it seems to me that social stereotyping is pervasive in these kind of interactions. And a central feature of what I'm trying to do, and the name of the central construct, horrifically jargon-ridden name, is co-constructing uniquenesses, which will become, I hope, a little bit clearer as we talk about the context in which it functions. I'm talking about a conversational move or strategy that is collaboratively accomplished by conversation partners in which they socially construct senses of uniqueness. And I just want to briefly share a couple of examples of that so you know what this central construct means. In the Dismantling Racism book, I go to Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, in the chapter 31, where she reports a conversation between her and a plumber. And as a result of this conversation that turned out to be transformative, I think, for her, certainly, and to some degree for him, I've identified these two uniquenesses. Isabel is uniquely a grieving child missing her recently deceased mom, especially acutely because the flooded basement floor that brought the two of them together also intensified her current grief about her recently deceased husband, who would normally be able to fix the water problem. The plumber is uniquely, in their conversation, a similarly grieving child also missing his deceased mom, even though she died 25 years before, whose grief at her loss was exacerbated by the fact that his still living dad is as mean as they come. And that's a quotation. So you get a sense of my method for identifying these uniquenesses is close reading, and you get a sense that these are narrative constructions by an outsider who these seem to be entailed to me by the text of their conversation. So these constructions are present in the text, not a conversation analytic text or a discourse analytic text, but a narrative text, as one might see in a novel. So the question is, if social stereotyping involves grouping around similarities, what happens when conversation partners individualize rather than only grouping and attend to uniquenesses, not just similarities? These are questions that I ask to pursue this overall goal. Within this overall goal, there's practical and academic and other goals. And this is how I would characterize a practical goal, include the focus on empathy and extend it to co-constructed uniquenesses. For brain health professionals, I'm encouraging being serious about both similarities and uniquenesses. And academic goals could be thought of as focusing on questions like these that would test the claims that I'm making about what happens in these conversations when these conversational moves are made. In the next to the last bullet, the conversational accomplishment, you're the one, is my name for the conversational accomplishment of co-constructing uniquenesses. And I'm arguing that it's a common feature of extended close relationship development, whether in personal or in professional contexts. You might have educational, organizational, political, and so on goals that would be in addition to these. And the work, I think, could be extended to move toward accomplishing these goals. So here's the argument that there are several arguments for pursuing these goals. The one that I'm going to talk about today is this one. And as I said, I began with empathy because it's taken seriously by a wide range of researchers and practitioners. And it's usually defined as a construction and characterized as the main psychological mechanism that enables us to be human, that is, to establish and maintain human relations. There are two problems that I think arise from that definition. And this is not exclusive. Empathy is not exclusively defined this way. There are some people working relationally, but I think that there are familiar, intuitively familiar power or cultural differences that I've just briefly characterized there that you might recognize emerge out of the desire to practice empathy and the problem of treating it as one person's capability or psychological mechanism rather than a co-construction. I want to argue that our closest relationships depend on both similarity and difference or uniqueness. So you see one argument for that goal, and I don't know whether any of you are old enough to remember Jim Croce's lyric, but it struck me as I was listening to him recently that was an example of it that appears in popular music and is accepted as, I understand what he's talking about, which suggests the familiarity with this phenomenon. This sort of thing happens. Most characteristically, I suppose, one doesn't marry a person just because we're both Democrats and we like the water or the mountains and so on, similarities, but because of the distinct qualities and features and characteristics and that we see in the other person, the object of our affection. There are also some published studies that validate this observation about uniqueness. And so there are three here from pretty well regarded um, uh, academic journals, professional journals, and quite recent publications. One crucial element to remember is that the uniqueness I'm talking about is relational, it's socially constructed. In 2020, there was a book with kind of an unfortunate title, I think, New and Science on Human Individuality, which reinscribes the obsolete understanding. I'm calling it obsolete because it is not relational. It's as if individuals are silos, locations for identities that don't emerge in relation with others. I think both Gergen and Arundel make good arguments that there's another way to think about what Arundel calls the individual pre-existing, or excuse me, the individual not pre-existing the relationship, but patterns of relationship and their embedded meanings that pre-exist the individual. That this distinction is really critical, and you may be familiar with Robin Penman, an Australian scholar and active person in social construction in the Taos Institute. When I sent her an early draft of some of these ideas, very clearly pointed out to me I need to talk about how I'm viewing uniqueness and this emphasis that I'm viewing it in a relational way emerged out of that. I've found published accounts of conversation partners dismantling racism that demonstrate, I think, the transformative potential of co-constructing uniquenesses. And it suggests to me that there are other places where examples of this conversational accomplishment occurring could be discovered. These are the three that I unpack in my book, Dismantling Racism One-on-One. And I think there's, these are three that I just ran across in reading about various contributions to the DEI literature, and I'm sure there are other cases. In the case of caste, Wilkerson's book, Isabel Wilkerson allowed a white plumber whom she saw as embodying the characteristics of a stereotyped blue-collar, make America great again worker. She allowed him into her home to look at the flood in the basement, the water on the basement floor. And by the end of the conversation, it couldn't have gone more than an hour and a half, referred to him as momentarily family. And I think that was a remarkable characterization coming from her. In the case of Thompson Canino, Jennifer Thompson Canino, and Ronald Cotton, in the book Picking Cotton, Jennifer was brutally raped by a black man in her apartment and picked Ronald Cotton out of a lineup. And as a result of her identification, he went to prison for 9 years. Only after admission of guilt from another person, another inmate, and DNA evidence was he freed. And subsequently, Ronald and Jennifer met and then established a relationship over the next, I think, maybe 15, 18 years. Ronald died in June of 2023. And they came to our community where a couple of hundred of us asked them questions for a couple hours, and they were moving around the country trying to talk about what led to the transformation in their relationship. And they traced it back to a single conversation, which is what I unpack when I talk about them. So I think these are moving and consequential conversations that are evidence. I think there's another benefit to reading these conversations closely, and that is that there are particularly conversational moves, 3 particular conversational moves that specifically animate the move in these conversations from either stereotyping or incomplete empathizing. And these are listed there. By reflections, I mean metacognitions, thinking about thinking, utterances that reflect that thinking about thinking. I've been wondering if this is the right thing to do. Several of us have been talking about that. These are examples of what I mean by reflections, ordinary language, utterances, people commonly make in conversations. Choices and feelings, obviously, or other manifestations of relationship development that pop up in conversations. And my belief is that one can enhance the use of the appeal to these conversational moves and encourage one's conversation partner to respond similarly, and that as a result of collaborating around these conversational efforts, the conversation partners can accomplish what I'm calling co-constructing uniquenesses. And so that's the argument. So my invitation to you is to bring your interest to this project. There's the you're the one phenomenon that I've talked about, the idea of an opposite of social stereotyping, the idea of co-constructing outcomes in talk, verbal, nonverbal talk, and conversational strategies. These are all questions that could be pursued as part of this overall effort. I think there's a lot of opportunities for people who are approaching this material from a variety of points of view to engage in this process. This is a outline that I've got a little bit more detailed version of, and again, if you want to connect by email, I can send you another version of this. So if I can, I want to stop screen sharing there and shift my view to this one. So I'm interested in your uptake on this, the questions that occur to you, the concerns, the disagreements, the possible extensions, the examples you have from your own experience of what we're talking about happening. Yep. Kathy, you're muted. Let's see. Alex, do you have a reason? Diz.
I can send you a request to unmute, but I'm not sure that changes anything on your end.
Kathy, I don't know what's going on while you're still muted. You've selected that, obviously. I see muting on all the other recipients. Alex, is that common at this point?
Yes, they control that on their own side, so there's not much I can do here.
Okay.
It was working earlier, so maybe logging back out and back in might work. Sometimes it resets. Anyone else has any comments in the meantime? Catherine, are you having trouble as well unmuting?
Happy to test the equipment and the software. Can you unmute?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
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 Okay, then yeah, I don't know what the technical difficulties are, but hopefully that's figured out. Yeah, my highest tech solution is log out and log back in, so I'm no help. I did want to share in the chat, John mentioned it in his PowerPoint that I had the privilege of hosting John on my podcast, Stories Lived, Stories Told, and I realized I didn't really introduce myself earlier, but I work with the CMM Institute. That's CMM, Coordinated Management of Meaning. That's something I assume, Kathy maybe has interacted with as a communication professor. And that's really rooted in social construction too. And so a part that's really compelling to me, and I think John did a great job of explaining in he and I's podcast conversation, was that kind of emphasis that maybe stems from his background in the Dismantling Racism one-on-one book around the kind of personal choice and personal ability to show up in these interpersonal situations to be co-constructing uniqueness relationally. And so since my world is the interpersonal communication of it all, that's the piece of that that's really compelling to me as the place to start, and then where that goes in terms of what we can change in our social worlds and what the larger implications can be. I see Kathy's back, so I'll go ahead and pause and maybe she can unmute.
Okay, I think I can try. Is that working?
Yeah, here you go.
Oh, it feels like I missed some really good conversation, so I apologize for that. And I'm afraid I might, if I'm taking us in a different direction with my contribution here, please just, we can table it. But I mean, one of the ways in which I think about and approach empathy, and what I'm doing right now is an undergraduate class where I'm really focused on how empathy relates to our ability to engage in dialogue, in dialogic communication, and the necessary sort of seeding the ground that has to occur. So we do a lot in our department to teach interpersonal and intergroup dialogue and to really focus on that process. And what I saw was missing was the fact that we have so many folks that just aren't prepared to engage in it in a way that's super meaningful. And a lot of that has to do with, some of these social issues around declining empathy, increasing loneliness, and all of these things. So what I have put together, and I'm teaching for the first time, is sort of an interdisciplinary sort of collection of reading centered in communication and positioning empathy as relational, and able to be cultivated in and through communication among partners. And what I'm looking to do is really look at the ways in which I kind of have it broken down to, it's centered in Buber, unsurprisingly, but really thinking about this notion of teaching students to first stand in relation to themselves and then stand in relation to the other in a way that allows them to construct this empathetic orientation that's healthy, that allows them to really think through self and other boundaries. And in that process, they're both, what I kind of draw from in this is the ability to co-construct uniqueness while acknowledging and holding these two things together, the similarity around more broad-based things that we experience as humans. So for example, human suffering. is a very common sort of experience across what we experience as humans, of course. But the manifestation of that is really contingent upon our positionality and the way that we experience the world. So while we may not be able to, and this is where we're at now, we have to really know ourselves and be compassionate and empathetic with ourselves, but also be real about the limitations of our own perspectives in order to truly embrace an empathetic orientation that might get us to a place to enter into dialogue in a more meaningful way. So that's how I've kind of been thinking about and approaching this. We'll see how it goes the rest of the semester.
Others have responses to Kathy?
Am I unmuted now?
Yes. Go ahead, Catherine.
You're remuted, Catherine.
Uh,
There you are. We don't hear you now, Catherine.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, still now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I was just saying, diversity, we have adopted a lot of language in South Africa around diversity and inclusion, but we have a different construction in our setting, because in South Africa, being white is a minority. And so actually we don't need diversity and inclusion, except obviously in very white dominant spaces, which still exist geographically and in terms of power and structure in organizations. But what I was thinking about when you were speaking was a very similar thing to what Kathy is saying, is that where I've been in groups where the attempts have been made to increase empathy or connection across racial differences, the difficulty has not been in seeing people as different. The difficulty for white people has been in accepting that people's experiences of racism have been structural and applied in groups. And so there's this difficulty to accept the realness or the widespread nature of systemic racism. And so when I was thinking, as you were speaking, what I was feeling is that it's sort of this inability to take in a group dynamic. So one wants to very quickly personalize the person standing in next to you, say, oh, well, you seem like you haven't suffered much, or actually you come from a family with another identity, which kind of obscures the racial component. Whereas what people of color have asked for in many of those spaces have been the willingness to accept that people have been treated as part of a group and have not been seen individually, and that experience requires some hearing, some acceptance, some empathy. So very much understanding that a social identity is placed on you, and that social identity may not match your inner identity, and so causes suffering and pain, but that the experience of having that social identity placed on you is a very real, very powerful one, which has had obviously generations of effects to people in society. So I found it interesting that we both spoke about the need to be willing to hear the group experiences as individuals are speaking about them.
Mm-hmm. Kathy, does that trigger something for you that you'd like to respond to?
No, I mean, not in particular with what I had said. I think, although I will say it does, a lot of what you're saying and experiencing to me really looks and thinks like something that an intergroup theorist might address. And so somebody who looks at the ways in which social identities, a lot of this categorization, stereotyping that John, you had talked about, looking at it from a social identity perspective and the ways in which we create in and out groups. And when that, in those group settings, that group dynamic or group identity becomes so much more salient. And so, you know, I kind of think about it in terms of where and how can we make that identity, you know, less salient in a particular situation to create space for that more personal connection across some of these other experiences that might feel less tied to a group identity. And all of that is, of course, embedded in power. When you were talking about the suffering associated with imposing an identity that isn't necessarily aligned with your identity, that speaks very to me. I think a lot about that, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm a communication theory, like I think about it that way, but the communication theory of identity and the ways in which we have a mismatch between the different levels of our identity and how we have more and less space based on the way we're situated structurally or socially, the power dynamics, how much voice do we have in relation to another to negotiate more alignment across those identities. So I'm not sure that really speaks, Catherine, to what you're saying. It's what kind of it's what your response made me think about in terms of thinking through those group dynamics.
As I listen to the, I'm sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
I think certainly that we're trying to unpack, you know, what empathy can and doesn't do. I think in one way there's just been a request in the spaces that I've been where there's been resistance from white people to really hearing people, and that it's a request for empathy around experiences that have been so socially determined by race, and then there wants to be a sidestepping of that so that people aren't really hearing and accepting and receiving and being present with the way that people choose to language what their experiences have been. And so that is preventing, I guess, some sort of presence with each other, if that makes any sense.
Catherine, I think one of the things that I thought about was that the resistance to the realization of systemic realities around race is very common among people in the US also. You might not think for a variety of reasons that it would be, but it is. So I wonder whether that's, well, I wonder about the cross-cultural implications of that. Some of the difficulties you talk about are part of what led me to focus in the book Dismantling Racism One-on-One on the if you want to call it the interpersonal situation where racism is experienced, because the realizations about in the US white supremacy and all of the implications of that, you know, beginning with the doctrine of discovery in 1450 or so, all the way through the present, and the experience of people of color in this culture about the experiences of white supremacy, and about the resulting or concomitant systemic ways racism manifests itself. Frequently surface among people I've talked to in the, okay, I've got it, what do I do? And the testimony that you alluded to, Catherine, about thinking about me as an individual rather than just pigeonholing me in a racial slot is kind of what led me to treat in that book this, to suggest that in one-on-one situations, one I think doesn't always happen, make progress in something below the systemic level that does not solve systemic problems. It does not solve the problem of law enforcement and racism in the US, or the employment system, or the mortgage lending system, or the educational system. It can ameliorate the local benefits of racist interactions in interpersonal situations. And while I don't have any proof, evidence, data, the beginning with the individual who has some power over and control over his or her choices and interaction patterns and what's said and how, that can increase the quality of contact that can have therapeutic, ameliorative impacts, I think, in small groups, in families, in spousal relationships, and other places that count. The one other comment I would make to Kathy is that your experience in the classroom may underscore, and this is a question that's an empirical question, I think, may underscore the role of developmental possibilities in the teaching process. Traditionally aged students, I don't know how many at your universities are traditionally aged, but traditionally aged students may not have had the experiences of, certainly most of them, I would assume, have not made the choice about who they want to marry. And so that experience with a long-term relationship, where perhaps it's the most culturally obvious and straightforward place to experience this, you're the one experience where uniqueness is important. That just hasn't happened for them yet. And so doing what you're doing seems to open the door to the possibility of that transition being more graceful and more successful when it occurs. So that would make a lot of sense. I'm not sure of that, though. Karen, you have anything for us? Make just one other comment, then, is you're thinking about what you want to say next. I'm not sure Buber was a social constructionist. And so while the formulation, oh, I can't remember the first word, while holding your own ground. What's the first part of that? Kathy, do you remember?
Being profoundly open to the other while holding your own ground.
That's right. Yes, thank you, Abby. While that's a relational formulation, and certainly in his autobiographical fragment about the tree and several other ones, and his emphasis on the between, which he called a primary category of human reality. Certainly he was focused on, and the hyphen between I and thou, or I and it. Co-construction, I think, would have been a very difficult pair of words for him to say. I just have that feeling that he didn't think that way. But maybe that's what he opens us to thinking. It's a way of thinking. I remember his, what I take to be his definition of persuasion in another place where he's not so much talking about his dialogue. And he characterizes it this way. He says, I find and further in the soul of the other the disposition toward that which I have recognized in myself as the right. And this is unfolding, and imposition versus unfolding in the essay, The Knowledge of Man. I find and further in the soul of the other the disposition toward that which I've recognized in myself as the right. Well, that's a kind of a monological move, very empathic. And this notion of imagining the real of the other also, but yeah. I'm interested in your evaluation of the evaluation of the notion you're the one. Is that a common relational experience in some relationships?
I think it's great that you make that distinction, like you just talked about, why maybe younger people wouldn't have experienced that, because I'm thinking about my own relationships that with my partner, it really is that you're the one, you are this unique person, and that is why I choose you. With some of my friendships, it's more we are similar, and so we are friends. So like you're saying, it's not every relationship is maybe that experience, but it could be. So of course, coming from the communication perspective that I do, I'm thinking about meaning making. And so through the lens that I'm looking at, what you're saying, and I'd be curious to know if this is how other people are seeing it too, is that you're asking us to make new meaning, or perhaps to try to make different meanings more obvious and give ourselves space to sit in that. So, if empathy is, I'm just Googling it just because I'm curious exactly what language people use. And what comes up for the definition of empathy is not only the ability to understand, it says the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. So that's the meaning that I'm taking from what your whole project is about. It's not just sharing the feelings of another. It's not, I get it because I've experienced that same thing. What beyond empathy would be, what co-constructing uniquenesses would be, I haven't had that same experience, but I believe you. And I think I said something like that in our podcast too, John, that it's, can I say, the meaning that I'm making and you say the meaning you're making? And that's that kind of dialogue definition. Can I be profoundly open to you while also holding my own ground? And that, rather than challenging the relationship or causing it to end, is what actually strengthens the relationship. So I don't know if that's exactly how other people are thinking of it too.
I mean, I'm trying to, I think, and this may be that I'm not fully understanding the you're the one construct as being, because the way you talked about it, like in response to me, was that this is somebody we're choosing based on uniqueness. And I'm trying to understand co-constructing uniqueness as it relates across these various relationships. So, and it may be that I'm just fundamentally missing the distinction here that you're making, that it for me, as I think about co-constructing uniqueness, I'm looking at that as a part of every relational encounter that we have. Like the goal is to create space for the unique qualities of the individual and acknowledge the places where there's similarity. So holding the two sort of equally together. And part of the cultivation of empathy, as I understand it, this affective and cognitive aspects, like this notion of being able to feel with somebody, but then also be able to use your cognitive processes and abilities to recognize those feelings are unique to the person and not your own. So it's not like this emotion contagion, but then also being able to adopt perspectives based on what you know or think you know about another person's experience, while acknowledging that you are only able to take that perspective so far because you're limited in your own sort of unique experiences. So it's the cognitive work you do to try to recognize the other person's positionality and see how that works. So when I think about like co-constructing that and co-constructing uniqueness, I'm wanting to see, and maybe John, you could clarify for me where I'm off, like this notion of you're the one as it relates to the co-construction of uniqueness across relationships, or does it?
At this point, in my understanding, I don't think co-constructing relationships is common to all conversations, and I don't think it's even an aspirational goal in all conversations. I do think it is aspirational because of the intimacy that, I don't want to say it produces, but it embodies or reflects or not characterizes. When it's not just a matter of my work, it's a matter of our work. And I think the identities that are co-constructed, the unique identities are co-constructed, are context dependent. And that's why I read that example, because it was very much Isabel's reflection on the water that was on her basement floor, which her husband could have taken care of, but he's dead. And she's coping. That's happened in the last 18 months of this conversation with the plumber. The plumber is 25 years away from his mother's death. We're switching between mother and father here. And yet he feels some similarity, at the same time difference. And as their conversation goes on, she, in her talk, reflects her understanding of that difference and that similarity, and then, further talk, to which he responds. I mean, I think a decisive point in the conversation is when Isabel says, I felt I had nothing to lose, and so I threw a Hail Mary at his humanity. And she said then to him, my mother has died recently. Is your mother still alive? And he didn't say, get away from me, over too much information, TMI. He said, he talked about his mother. And then he talked about his father, who's still alive and as mean as they come. That dance they did together, and that it was done together, is this co-constructed, context-dependent conversational effort, which is what I think you can see in part in their last utterances. His saying as he bounded up the steps to leave, there's photos here, those are memories, and she said to her reader, momentarily family. Those two pieces of the conversation, as she reported it, admittedly, embody the co-construction, I think.
We have a couple of minutes left before we wrap up. So any last thoughts or comments?
Let me just say thank you. Thank you very much for giving me your time, for giving each other your time and your focus here. I appreciate very much your engagement with these issues, and look forward to hearing more from you if it floats your boat, if it responds to something you're interested in. Lots of opportunity here.
John, can you put your email in the chat, because I didn't get it off the PowerPoint, if that's possible?
Sure.
And so as you saw, this conversation was recorded, and we will post the recording in the comments in the online community. And then you can continue to post comments there and find each other, connect with each other right there in the comments. It will also be a link to YouTube. So feel free to share and invite others to view the recording. And yes, once again, thank you for joining us for a rich conversation. John, thank you so much for hosting today, and wishing you all the best.
No space and no capital C, obviously. The slides are available on YouTube. Slides are available on YouTube, David.
In the comments. I can't put them on YouTube, but they will be in the comments in the community as an attachment. Yes, we'll do that.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank
Good to see you, John. Good to talk with all of you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Bye now.